Hello everyone, Ian here. If you're playing Looking Glass Studios' 1998 game Thief: The Dark Project in hard or expert mode, you'll get the objective of stealing an object called the Serpentile Torque. The Torque is located in the Haunted Cathedral level, in a secluded neoclassical mansion, separated from the rest of the level and only accessible via a hidden path. The mansion is patrolled by two Hammerhaunt enemies. It's the first time that players will encounter them up close in the game, so it's the first time they'll hear some of the most unsettling sound design in the history of video games. Let's go through the excruciating experience of trying to pick this lock. This building is actually not that big, and the Hammerhaunts are patrolling on a very tight loop. There's just barely enough time to pick this lock before they return to the area, so you're better off picking it in segments, retreating to the mansion's exterior each time you hear them approach again. But the Serpentile Torque isn't in this room. To get it, we have to go upstairs. And along the way, we need to turn off some lights to take advantage of Thief's trademark hiding in the dark mechanic. The trip up to the second floor will be a stop-start affair, as we cower in the shadows, wait for the Hammerhaunts to pass, move forward, and repeat. The treasure chest that the Torque is stored in is next to the bed. While you pick its lock, the haunts come back up the stairs. And for a brief but terrifying moment, it looks as if they've spotted you and are headed straight toward you. But no. At the last second, they turn back and continue their patrol. The darkness has protected you, for now. This terrifying moment is pretty much guaranteed to happen for players during a successful run of this section. But it's not scripted in the traditional sense. It is a product of very careful timing, the time it takes to pick locks, the duration of the haunt's patrol route, and the safe hiding spaces snuck within that patrol route, all had to line up to ensure that this moment would be experienced by players. The haunts move like utter clockwork. If they don't hear or see anything suspicious, they have no AI at all. They just have a set looping path, which they march along ad infinitum. One might think that this clockwork predictability necessarily makes the Hammerhaunts less scary, but I don't agree with that at all. All the way back in the second episode of this series, I said that horror games don't always benefit from AI that is explicitly cunning or hunter-like. Non-aggressive enemy behavior can work if it feels sufficiently alien. In episode 2, I gave the example of the lying figures in Silent Hill 2's Labyrinth level, which are slow to react to your presence, but still keep you on edge. Other horror games feature enemies with schizoid personalities, alternating between aggressively rushing forward to attack you, and then retreating into the nearby darkness. The psychotic rioters in Condemned Criminal Origins are especially fond of retreating. Sometimes this is scripted. And if I had to guess, I'd venture that there's also some sort of AI rule going on here, where their level of aggression depends on how the stats of the current weapon you're holding compare to their own weapon. But even if it is something as straightforward as that, and I don't know, it's really hard to test this sort of thing from a user-end perspective, there's still something profoundly weird and unsettling about the erratic ways in which they react to your presence. The cannibals in the forest are fond of retreating too, of watching you from afar until it's safe to strike. And they engage in some even weirder behavior as well. I'll never forget the moment that a group of them ceased their hostilities, sat down on the ground, and started singing. The Hammerhaunts aren't unpredictable. They're very predictable. But their non-aggressive predictability is still itself strange and uncanny. Obviously, the sounds they make play a huge part here. There's a traditional scary story, reproduced as The Voice in More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which is all about the slow and inexorable approach of something horrific. A voice at the bottom of the stairs, menacingly announcing, now I'm on the first step, now I'm on the second step. Versions of this story abound, and I think their popularity speaks to something hardwired in us. There's something about us that fears the inevitable approach of something terrible, more so than its arrival or actual presence. The simple looping path of these Hammerhaunts means that we hear their sounds get closer and closer, over and over and over again. Approach after approach after approach after approach. If they actually find you and initiate combat with you, they're not that scary, really. Like everything in this game from 1998, they're kinda chunky looking. Once you get a clear view of them, the horror dispels. The trick here is to keep us focusing on the sound. The looping of gradual crescendos, indicating that they're coming back around again, approaching us again, once again encroaching on our momentarily safe area. So this episode's going to be about sound and place, and how these factors can come together to create frightening environments. It's going to be a little bit scattershot, oriented around a handful of specific case studies, rather than having a strong argumentative through line. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. I wanted to start with Looking Glass's output, because in their heyday, Looking Glass employed some masterful sound designers and sound technologists. The Dark Engine, which Thief was built upon, might not look like much today, but the engine included state-of-the-art tools for controlling sound position and propagation. The use of sound to indicate enemy positions in Dark Engine games went far beyond what developers were accomplishing in contemporaneous games, evincing a care that's rare to find even today. As a result, there are spaces in Dark Engine games that I remember vividly, that have attached themselves to my subconscious much more than spaces in games I've played many more times. Spaces like this particular hallway on the eastern edge of Hydroponics in System Shock 2. On the map, it just looks like an ordinary hallway. It does have a bit of a ramp, but there are ramps all over the place in this game, so that's not much of a differentiating factor. Its lighting and wall textures are utterly unremarkable. But I distinctly remember pausing at the end of it, not wanting to progress any further down it. Hear that? Drifting through the recirculated air from somewhere down there? Those are the buzzings and mutterings of a cyborg midwife, one of the most terrifying enemies in the game. Once you get a good look at them, they're as low poly and visually unimpressive as anything else in this game. But that vocal performance, those buzzings, that sound design doesn't age in the same way that the game's visuals have. And so I would just stand right here, imagining what I hadn't yet seen, freaking myself out about the faint noises echoing down a hallway when I could just march down the damn thing and take the midwife out with a few swings of my wrench.
You're mine now.
See that? She wasn't that tough. And she's only made of like 8 polygons. Not so scary now, are you? Now that you're not a mysterious, unseen source of terrible sounds drifting down a hallway. In order to get a good recording of this, I had to turn down the music, which would have otherwise been too distracting. I'm not a huge fan of the music in System Shock 2. In general, I think that Looking Glass games are at their best when they de-emphasize music. But music is important to a lot of horror games. So let's leave Looking Glass's games behind and turn to some more relevant case studies in this area. When talking about music in horror games, the most obvious examples to turn to would be music designed to scare you. But I actually want to introduce the topic from the opposite direction. There's a long history of the save rooms in Resident Evil games having a distinct musical score. Although each of these rooms has a different layout, the consistent score provides them with a sort of baked-in mood. You immediately feel at ease in these rooms, because of the Pavlovian connection the game set up between this pleasant, relaxing soundtrack cue and the safety from attacks that these rooms provide. No matter how dicey things were in the hallway immediately outside, no monsters ever come crashing through this door. The music makes a promise to us, the promise that this space is safe. If at any point the rules changed, and suddenly this space was no longer safe, that would feel like a violation. Resident Evil has traditionally avoided violating the sonic sanctity of its save spaces, but other games do toy with this line. The save and upgrade area in The Evil Within, associated with strands of Debussy's Clair de Lune wafting through the air, remains generally consistent for long periods of time. It's not the most inviting space ever, but the nurse station there is friendly.
It's been a while since your last visit.
And it seems to be safe. But then over the course of the game, the consistency of this place is disrupted in ways that are designed to get under your skin. There's a painting here now where there wasn't one before. And there are bugs crawling out of it? Now the color balance is different. And there's a mural on the wall. Now there's a blackout.
What was that sound?
And the friendly nurse isn't at her post. Now the paint is peeling, and there's debris strewn around. Now the ceiling is transparent, and you can see the skybox through it. This never becomes an outright dangerous space, with hostile enemies around that attack us, but its gradual corruption keeps us on edge. Even the most minor shifts make this place feel unstable. Unlike the Resident Evil save rooms, it's not a place that can be fully trusted, so we should never let our guard down. In episode 9, when I discussed the distinction between diegetic and non-diegetic music, I characterized non-diegetic music as primarily existing to influence our emotions as viewers. In practice, this means that non-diegetic score can be used to create suspense and paranoia. Back in episode 6, I adopted Alfred Hitchcock's definition of suspense. It's an emotional reaction that arises out of a knowledge differential, when there's a gap between what we know as viewers and what on-screen characters know, usually about dangers they're facing. Paranoia is very similar, except I differentiated it by specifying that we only suspect something that the characters aren't aware of, rather than know it outright. The way in which music can contribute to suspense and paranoia is demonstrated nicely in Jaws, which has one of the most famous film scores of all time, mainly due to how heavily it influences the movie's sense of paranoia. The actual shark makes very few appearances in Jaws. In its place, we have frequent underwater shots, which serve as a sort of shark POV analog to the stalker cam. They seem to be connected to a body with violent intent. And along with it, we hear the famous leitmotif. We can hear this theme. The characters cannot. And in hearing it, we become convinced that they're not safe. Meanwhile, they remain oblivious. Until disaster strikes. Another example I like here is Gravity. Gravity has a very synesthetic score, where almost every bit of action on screen is given some sort of musical equivalent. The diegetic sound in this film is limited to what the protagonist herself would be able to hear, which isn't very much when you're in space. So the score ends up musically representing many of the things that we would hear sound effects for in another film. Gravity's director Alfonso Cuarón had some regrets about how much he relied on music in the film. And so for the 2015 release of the Diamond Luxe Edition Blu-ray, he included an alternate cut known as Silent Space, which strips out the musical score entirely. It's a fascinating object because it shows how much work the score was doing in the theatrical cut. For instance, in this scene, Sandra Bullock's character is oblivious to the danger she's in. And just as an experiment, I want you to keep track of when you first notice any danger that she doesn't notice.
Okay, we detach this and we go home. Piece of cake. Okay, what are we at? Okay, where are you? Shit.
The first bit of incoming debris that streaks across the screen actually arrives at the 4-second mark of the clip that I just showed you. Sandra Bullock's character doesn't notice the debris until the 50-second mark. In order for the scene to be suspenseful, we're supposed to notice it before her, but early on it's pretty indistinct. I wouldn't be surprised if viewers didn't notice the first few bits of debris. Contrast this to the version with the score.
Okay, we detach this and we go home. Piece of cake.
Here suspense is in full force. The score's crescendo puts us on edge, which makes us scan the frame for danger earlier in the shot. This virtually guarantees that we'll see the debris earlier on. And it also helps that the score has some electronic whizzing type sounds in it, which serve as a synesthetic complement to the debris's movement across the screen. The reason I made this detour into film scoring is the same reason I tackled the themes of suspense and paranoia in cinema in episode 6. Non-diegetic music can serve as a sort of set of emotional instructions for film audiences. This opens up a knowledge gap because we're primed to notice or imagine dangers that a film's characters are oblivious to. This is, in turn, what gives these scenes their power. This presents a challenge for non-diegetic scores in games. If horror games scores too reliably serve as an indicator for danger, it can actually make games less scary, because it confirms or disconfirms the presence of monsters, and removes the fear of the unknown. In short, it's possible for the score to tell us too much. And since we control our player character, it doesn't even serve to open up any interesting knowledge gaps along the way. For instance, I really like the score of Amnesia: The Dark Descent. There's a main leitmotif that indicates the presence of the grunt enemies, which is dark and moody. Then later in the game, you're introduced to the leitmotif that indicates the presence of the more dangerous brute enemies, which is louder, more staccato, and unrelenting. Both of these themes are fantastic, and really scary on their own terms. But because they serve as cues for danger, they conversely serve as cues for safety. When I'm cowering, hiding in a corner, most of the time I'm actually listening for the loop points in the score. I know that eventually the score will wind down, and gradually decrescendo out of the soundtrack. And when it does that, I know that the enemy is gone, and that I'm free to come out of hiding and wander around as I please. The game's score is steadfastly reliable, and this means that it's fair, but it gradually makes the game less scary if you learn its rules. As the machinery becomes less opaque. Certain Resident Evil games suffer from the same problem. Resident Evil 4 is accompanied by cacophonous drumming when you're in open combat, and I have very distinct memories of one particular area where that drumming just wouldn't stop. Some enemy was hiding in an out-of-the-way corner of the map, I couldn't find him, and in any case he was no longer a danger to me. But the score just refused to calm down, and transition to something moodier. It just kept blasting its full-on battle theme, as I methodically collected stray ammo and herbs. It got to be annoying after a while, which is absolutely not something you want your players to feel. A good contrast to Resident Evil 4 and Amnesia is Capcom's recent remake of Resident Evil 2, which uses its score sparingly, and leans much more heavily on the actual diegetic sounds that monsters make to indicate their presence. In the abstract, hiding in a save room in Resident Evil 2, waiting for the tyrant's clomping footsteps to subside, isn't all that different from hiding in Amnesia, waiting for the monster's leitmotif to end. But when you're actually playing, there's a lot to be said for matching what you hear as closely as possible to what your player character is actually hearing. I don't have to listen closely to the score in Amnesia. By contrast, in RE2, I am totally absorbed into the sonic moment, trying to discern whether that stomping is coming from the floor above me or the floor below me, planning my mad dash to the next area. There are ways to integrate musical score into enemy encounters that don't over-telegraph danger and safety. One way is to engage in Mickey Mousing. That is, have your score act as an exact audio representation, synced to what the player sees on screen, rather than having it be a reliable indicator of things your player character can't see. I like ZombiU's approach to this. Every little moment of potential contact between you and a zombie is scored with a brushed snare roll, heightening the moment just enough, without ever musically indicating something that you wouldn't be aware of prior. Herding is a topic I've touched on before, the very first part of my Half-Life 2 series. It's a term for how game designers direct our attention and our movement in three-dimensional space, pushing us along to their desired objectives. In Valve's case, I talked a lot about false choices you don't know you're making. That is, creating a space that initially feels expansive, but then using unconscious level cueing to encourage players to wander down what is, in actuality, the only viable route. In horror games, the principles are basically the same, but there are some additional twists. I touched on Monolith Productions' horror FPS games in the Half-Life 2 series, and pointed out that their design encourages players to second-guess themselves, to hesitate as they try to discern which potential route seems safe and which seems spookier. This is an additional wrinkle in horror games. You don't always want players to immediately go to the next place they're supposed to go. Sometimes you want to make them dread going into a space, to put it off until it becomes clear that they have no other option. Just as I dreaded going down that terrible hallway in System Shock 2. I'm going to devote the remainder of this video to one case study where I think this is done particularly well. It's a particular map in Amnesia: The Dark Descent, the Archives level. I wanted to counterbalance some of the critiques I had of Amnesia's use of music earlier, and show off a stretch of the game where I think its sound design is really on point. There's no in-game map in Amnesia, but here's a basic mock-up I've made. And for the sake of simplicity, let's label things north, south, east, west. Totally arbitrary, you could orient this map any way you want, but it helps us out. The entrance where you spawn is here on the west side. As soon as you take a few steps forward, you hear the guttural growl of a monster, the first in the entire game. It's coming from your left, perhaps in the rare books room, perhaps somewhere in the parlor area. It's initially hard to tell, but it's super easy to peer into the rare books room. It's empty, so that leaves the parlor. I'm not going to go in there right now. Instead, I'm going to poke around in the rare books room and then the catalog room. I'll be fast forwarding through some of this stuff because it will include a lot of resource collection, journal entries, and even some explanations of the game's controls. Having done all that, we now have two choices. We can head down the hallway into the parlor, or we can go into the study. And we have an interesting reversal here. The parlor is well lit, with plenty of natural light streaming through the windows. So you would think it would be the more inviting space, but we heard a growl coming from its general direction, which counterbalances that fact. Let's say I'm a little spooked, so I'll head into the study first. Well, there's a weird distorted groan. Fewer and fewer places on this map are feeling safe. The groans seem to come from the south, or maybe from the southwest. It's possible that something's lurking in the old tomes room, but if not, then that parlor is seeming less and less safe. As we enter the old tomes room, things initially seem safe, but there's a stinger moment, and suddenly we hear piano music wafting through the air. It is very distinctly coming from the south. The closer I get to the wall between the old tomes room and the parlor, the louder it gets. So by this point we can guess that the parlor is definitely bad news. And once again, we're in a dark room, fearing what might be waiting for us in a well-lit room. This is a reversal of expectations, but the game is also training us. Although you gradually lose your sanity in the darkness also protects you from monsters. You can hide there. The light leaves you exposed. The door to the local history room is locked from this side, so we have no other options. We finally have to follow the light into the parlor. Okay, here we go. There's a piano in here. That's creepy. It definitely seems as if there was someone or something in here just a moment ago. But it feels safe now. And we're regaining sanity as we spend time in the light, so maybe it's not so bad? Oh god, a groan again. And it's coming from the only place I have left to go. This seems to be a dead end, except for two rooms, the floor plan room and the map room. We prompt a scene in each of these rooms, which I'm gonna be skipping over. As we enter the map room, the ceiling collapses. And we're seemingly trapped by rubble. If we return to the map room, there's a journal entry here that prompts the most elaborate memory in the game, recreating the moment when Daniel found the orb. As we recover from that memory, we hear piano music again.
Peculiar relic.
apparently someone, or something, is back in the parlor again. I guess it's good that we're stuck in here? Fast forwarding some here because it's not too interesting hurting-wise. We have to break some exposed brick to open up the wall to the local history room. Once we're in there, there's a memory which explains how to use the secret passage mechanism to open the door to the hidden office. Once we pick up the key in here, there's a scripted moment where a grunt breaks down the previously locked door between this room and the outer hallway. We're almost home free now. But we need to pass through the parlor once more. There's no other way out. And as we do... Now I'm going to do something right now that pretty much no player would do the first time through this game. I'm going to run and try to catch up with that grunt. Along the way, you'll hear me trigger some other audio cues, but I'll never catch up with the grunt. It has completely despawned. In truth, there has never been any danger in this space at all. The only moments that monsters appear are scripted, and they can't hurt you. I've been jumping at shadows because of a bunch of scripted sound cues. The game's still throwing them at me. But there's nothing in here. I'm alone with some audio files. Alright, so that's it for this episode. I hope I've shown, through a variety of case studies, the various ways in which sound, whether that's musical score or diegetic sound, can contribute to a sense of place in horror games, affecting players' feelings of danger and safety, and consequently affecting their behavior. I realize some of the things you've seen and heard in this episode might have freaked you out, so I'll play you out with some Resident Evil save room music. There. You're safe now. Thanks for watching.